The old man left you this piece of junk. Daniel's voice cut through the low, steady hum of the central air conditioning. He did not even bother to look up. His thumb just kept swiping across the glass screen of his iPhone. Swipe, pause, swipe. The sound of his absolute apathy was louder than the AC unit. He sat slouched in a custom-tailored Italian suit, reeking of Tom Ford cologne and a hangover he was barely trying to hide. The lawyer's office smelled like sour cigar smoke mixed with old, expensive leather. It was the kind of heavy, stagnant smell that stuck to the back of your throat and made you want to spit. My throat was dry, bone dry. I stood there, my boots planted firmly on the thick Persian rug, looking at the dead center of the massive oak table. Lawyer Whitmore pushed a small scuffed wooden box across the polished wood. The bottom of the box scraped harshly against the grain. It stopped exactly 3 inches from the edge of the table. "For Clara," Whitmore muttered. He adjusted his wire-rimmed glasses, refusing to make eye contact, and looked down at his files. To my left, Rebecca let out a soft, rehearsed sniffle. She pressed the corner of a silk Hermes scarf to her perfectly dry eyes. "It is just so tragic. We are all grieving Clara. You have to understand that. It is a hard time for the family." I did not look at her. I kept my eyes locked on the wooden box. 3 years. 3 years of unpaid leave. 3 years of sleeping in a hard plastic chair next to a dying man's bed. My spine aching, my hands cracked and raw from constant washing. I remembered the smell of industrial bleach, rotting tissue, and stale urine. I remembered the heavy, wet, suffocating sound of the oxygen machine pumping air into his failing lungs. I gave up my career, my private life, and my sleep to be the good daughter. I reached out and flicked the brass latch of the box. It popped open with a hollow click. Inside, resting on a bed of faded, dusty velvet, was a military watch. Korean War era. The thick glass face was cracked straight down the middle, a jagged line splitting the numbers in half. The leather strap was stiff, flaking away and eaten up by green mold. The second hand was jammed hard against the number 6. Dead. The thing had probably been dead since the 1980s. As for the rest of the estate, Whitmore cleared his throat, shuffling the crisp white papers in front of him. Daniel receives the entire real estate portfolio. This includes the primary residence and the commercial lots in downtown Charleston. Rebecca assumes the role of CEO for Rose Coastal Logistics, along with the controlling shares allocated to her name. Clara, Whitmore folded his hands together. Clara receives the personal effects mentioned. The watch. "Thank you for coming today, Clara." That was it. Millions of dollars in assets. A massive shipping empire. Prime coastal properties. All of it divided between a man who spent his father's dying days racking up massive liquor tabs at the country club, and a woman who only showed up when the life insurance policy finally cleared. And for the unmarried, childless daughter, the one who scrubbed bloody vomit off the cold bathroom tiles at 3 in the morning, a broken piece of trash and a cold dismissal. Any normal civilian would have lost their mind. They would have flipped the heavy oak table. They would have screamed until their lungs gave out, smashed the glass, demanded what was rightfully owed to them. I did not move a single muscle. Inhale for 4 seconds. Hold for 4. Exhale for 4. Hold for 4. The sniper's breath. I locked my ribcage down. I let the silence in the room stretch out thick, heavy, and suffocating. My eyes worked like a radar sweep, panning across the room, analyzing the threat level, calculating the exits. The heavy mahogany door to the left. The reinforced glass window behind the desk. I watched the people sitting in front of me. Daniel's expensive leather shoes started tapping under the table. A rapid, nervous rhythm. His thumb finally stopped swiping. Rebecca lowered her scarf, her lips pressing into a tight, thin white line. They wanted me to break. They desperately needed me to cry, to beg, to look like the pathetic, broke failure they always told their friends I was. They wanted to look at my faded olive-drab surplus jacket, my scuffed combat boots, and feel superior. They needed my tears to justify stealing my life. They had absolutely no idea what it took to stand in this room and not break their jaws. You do not bleed for people who have never tasted battlefield dust. You do not waste your anger on tourists who have never seen the inside of a body bag. Their arrogance was just noise, loud, pointless noise. I reached out to take the watch from the velvet bedding. A single fluid motion, no hesitation. But as I pulled my hand back, my eyes caught a shift in the room's baseline. A structural crack in their little theatrical performance. Whitmore. The lawyer's hands were retreating across the polished oak. His right index finger was trembling. It was not a nervous little twitch. It was a full, uncontrollable tremor. The kind of shake that comes from a massive dump of adrenaline. I shifted my gaze up just a fraction of an inch. I looked at the pulse point on his neck. His carotid artery was hammering against his skin. A single thick drop of sweat was sliding down the back of his neck, disappearing into the collar of his starched white shirt. My brain processed the data in a microsecond. Daniel was bored and greedy. Rebecca was faking her grief. That was all standard operating procedure. But Whitmore was terrified. A senior corporate lawyer who just successfully brokered a multi-million-dollar asset transfer does not shake. He does not sweat like a pig in an office chilled to 68 degrees, unless he knows something about the piece of junk he just handed over. Unless a dead watch is not just a dead watch. I picked up the cold metal. I slipped it deep into the right pocket of my jacket. I did not ask any questions. I did not demand an explanation. You gather the intel first. You strike second. That is how you win a war. I turned around. The heavy reinforced heel of my combat boot struck the marble floor just outside the edge of the Persian rug. A sharp, violent crack that echoed off the oak-paneled walls like a gunshot. I looked over my shoulder. I locked eyes with the lawyer just long enough to see him swallow hard. "Thank you," I said. My voice was completely flat. Dead. I pushed the heavy brass-handled doors open and walked out into the long, empty hallway. The enemy line had a fracture, and I was going to tear it wide open. 4 in the afternoon. The sky outside my window was the color of dirty, wet concrete. A bitter draft bled through the cracks in the cheap aluminum window frame, cutting right through my thin sweater. My apartment smelled like boiled cabbage from the unit downstairs and stale coffee. I sat at a scratched laminate table, staring at a stack of unpaid medical bills and the cracked watch resting in the center. 3 knocks. Knock, knock, knock. The sound punched through the rattling noise of the dying space heater in the corner. It was not the frantic pounding of a bill collector. It was not the hesitant tap of a neighbor. It was 3 deliberate, evenly spaced strikes. The heavy, controlled rhythm of a man who owned the time. I stood up. My combat boots scuffed against the peeling linoleum. I crossed the cramped room and threw the deadbolt. The lock clicked with a harsh snap. I pulled the heavy door open. The man standing in the narrow, dim hallway did not belong in a building like this. General Raymond Mercer, 4 stars, former Commandant of the United States Marine Corps. A living ghost of the battlefield. His dress uniform was immaculate, pressed so sharp the creases could cut glass. The heavy brass buttons absorbed the flickering yellow light of the hallway bulb. He looked past the peeling paint on the doorframe. His pale, hawk-like eyes scanned my muddy boots, the cheap folding chairs, and the stack of paperwork on my table. He did not offer a pitying smile. He did not apologize for the intrusion. He straightened his back, brought his right hand up in a razor-sharp arc, and saluted me. "Major Rose," he said. His voice was gravel and iron. The cheap, suffocating reality of my civilian life shattered in that single second. In this miserable building, I was just a broke single woman who scrubbed toilets for a dying man. But to the man wearing 4 stars, I was exactly what I had bled to become. I returned the salute, my muscle memory taking over. "General." I stepped back, allowing him inside. He moved with a stiff, calculated grace, filling the cramped space with an overwhelming gravity. He did not sit on the cheap chairs. He walked straight to the laminate table and looked down at the broken Korean War watch. "Your father gave you this," Mercer stated. It was not a question. His lawyer did, a parting gift. Mercer let out a low, humorless sound, a dry exhale that held zero respect for the dead. He reached into his coat pocket, pulled out a pair of reading glasses, and slid them onto his face. Then he picked up the watch. His hands were old. The skin was mapped with liver spots and thick protruding blue veins, but his grip was absolute. He did not look at the cracked glass face or the jammed second hand. He turned the heavy steel casing over. His thick thumb traced the rusted edge near the winding crown. Civilians only look at the surface. Mercer said, his voice dropping an octave. They never check for the hidden seams. He dug his thumbnail into a microscopic groove right below the crown. He applied a sudden brutal amount of pressure. Crack! The solid metal back of the watch popped open on a concealed hinge. I stepped closer, my eyes narrowing. There were no gears inside, no springs, no battery. The entire inner casing had been hollowed out. Resting in the empty steel belly was a tightly rolled piece of paper. It was brittle-yellowed with age and smelled heavily of old dust and dry rot. Mercer used the tip of a pen to carefully pry the paper loose. He unrolled it flat on the table, pressing the curled edges down against the laminate. It was not a letter. It was a sequence of numbers. A set of longitude and latitude coordinates followed by a 9-digit alphanumeric passcode and the insignia of the Charleston Veterans Bank. I stared at the numbers. What is this? The truth, Mercer said. He took off his glasses and looked at me. The iron in his eyes gave way to something older, something heavy and dark. Winter of 1952. The Chosin Reservoir, North Korea. I knew the name. Every Marine knew the name. It was a frozen hell. The temperature dropped to 30 below zero. Mercer continued, his voice steady, reciting a memory etched into his bones. The Chinese forces had us surrounded, mortar fire turning the snow black. I was a private, caught shrapnel in my femur, could not walk. The unit was falling back. I was dead weight. He pointed a gnarled finger at the yellow paper. Your grandfather, Sergeant Walter Rose, refused the order to leave me behind. He strapped me to his back. He crawled for 2 miles through waist-deep snow, dragging my bleeding body while the enemy rained fire on us. By the time we reached the rally point, Walter's gloves had frozen to his skin. The medics had to cut his boots off. He lost both his hands to severe frostbite. He gave up his body so I could keep mine. The room was dead silent. Only the rattling of the heater broke the quiet. No medals, Mercer said. No newspaper articles. Walter did not want the noise. He came back in silence, built a logistics company from nothing, and never spoke a word of his sacrifice. Mercer stepped closer to me. The air in the room grew dense. But your father knew. Thomas knew exactly what his father gave up. Mercer's lip curled in deep disgust. Thomas was a coward. He dodged the draft. He hid behind his father's money. He spent his entire pathetic life terrified of Walter's shadow. He knew he could never measure up to a man who crawled through hell for a brother. The pieces violently crashed together in my head. 38 years. 38 years of being treated like a disease. Thomas paraded Daniel around because Daniel was just like him, weak, greedy, and hollow. But Thomas looked at me, and he saw Walter. He saw the military posture. He saw the discipline. He saw the exact kind of grit that exposed his own cowardice. He did not hate me because I was a failure. He hated me because I was the only standard of perfection he could never reach. He weaponized my duty to the family just to break my spirit. He made me scrub floors to prove he had power over the one thing he feared. My chest tightened. The air felt thin. A deep, cold realization flooded my veins, freezing out any lingering grief I had for that man. Mercer tapped his heavy gold ring against the table. The sharp noise snapped my focus back to the present. Walter Rose did not build a shipping empire to hand it over to parasites. Mercer said, his voice ringing with absolute authority. He structured a trust 30 years ago. He locked it away completely out of Thomas's reach. He left it for the only actual soldier in the bloodline. Mercer tapped the yellowed coordinates one last time. He squared his shoulders, looking at me, not as a civilian, but as a commanding officer evaluating his weapon. You have the target coordinates, Major. Mercer's eyes locked onto mine, sharp as a combat blade. Now tell me, do you want revenge or do you want justice? 2 hours later, downtown Charleston. The subterranean vault of the Veterans Bank smelled like damp concrete and old copper. The air down here was heavy, dead. It pressed against the back of my neck like a physical weight. The branch manager was a quiet, aging man with a slight limp and a faded anchor tattoo on his forearm. He did not ask questions. He did not try to make small talk. He walked us down the narrow, caged row of gray steel cabinets, his rubber-soled shoes squeaking faintly against the polished linoleum floor. He stopped at box 82. He inserted his master key into the primary lock. I slid the brass key from my grandfather's watch into the secondary slot. We turned them at the exact same time. A heavy mechanical grind echoed down the long corridor, solid steel disengaging. The manager stepped back, giving a brief silent nod before retreating to the security gate. He left us completely alone. I pulled the long metal drawer out. It weighed a ton. The metal shrieked slightly against the tracks. I carried it over to the stainless steel viewing table under the harsh glare of the fluorescent tubes. The light hummed, a low, relentless electric buzz that sounded like a hive of hornets trapped in a tin can. I looked at General Mercer. He stood near the entrance of the small viewing cubicle. His hands were clasped behind his back, his posture as rigid as a steel beam. Watching, waiting. He did not hover. He gave me the space to face whatever was inside. I looked down at the open metal box. There were no stacks of $100 bills, no gold bars, no velvet pouches filled with family jewelry. There was just a heavy olive-drab military moisture barrier bag, the exact kind used to keep ammunition dry in the humid jungles of Vietnam. On top of it sat a thick manila envelope sealed with a dark red wax stamp. I reached in and pulled the bag out. The thick plastic rustled loudly in the quiet room. I broke the heavy vacuum seal with my thumb. I slid the contents onto the cold steel table. Legal documents, stiff, heavy stock paper. The edges were sharp enough to cut skin. The ink was dark, permanent, and dense. I flipped through the first stack, my eyes scanning the headers. Bearer shares. My breath stopped for a fraction of a second. My eyes locked onto the bold print at the top of the certificates. They were not registered to a specific name. They were not tied to a digital bank account or a specific routing number. They belonged entirely and legally to whoever held the physical paper in their hands. And right now, I was holding them. I scanned the secondary documents beneath the shares. Trust fund structures, subsidiary holdings, asset allocation charts, real estate deeds for the entire Charleston port sector. Then I saw the final aggregated number at the bottom of the ledger. 51%. A cold, hard knot formed in my stomach. I read the clauses again. My brain processed the dense legal jargon with the cold, detached efficiency of a tactical battlefield briefing. Thomas Rose, my father, the man who made me scrub his floors and clean his blood-specked vomit at 3 a.m. He never owned Rose Coastal Logistics. He never controlled the shipping empire. He was nothing but a glorified figurehead, a weak puppet sitting behind a massive mahogany desk, signing operational papers he probably did not even understand. Walter Rose had seen right through his own son. 30 years ago, my grandfather engineered a hostile corporate takeover of his own company from the grave. He locked the controlling shares in a blind, impenetrable trust. He permanently blocked Thomas from ever inheriting the root of the empire, allowing him to only play with the superficial profits. And he named a single sole successor to the actual throne. Me. The will that lawyer Whitmore read this morning. The millions of dollars Daniel and Rebecca were currently celebrating over expensive imported martinis at the country club. It was garbage. It was a paper empire. They owned 49% of a company that I now legally and absolutely controlled. Daniel did not have the authority to sell a single rusty forklift or a dilapidated warehouse without my direct signature. My jaw tightened. The muscles in my neck pulled taut. 38 years. For 38 years, my brother and sister looked down on me. They mocked my military uniform. They called me a broke failure. They treated me like an unpaid servant, demanding I sacrifice my life to care for a man who despised me. And the entire time they were funding their tailored Italian suits, their luxury cars, and their Hermes scarves with my money. Thomas used my grandfather's wealth to build a throne of lies just so he could look down and spit on the only person who actually possessed the grit of the man he feared. They used my own inheritance to finance my humiliation. I set the bearer shares down on the steel table. I picked up the wax-sealed manila envelope. I snapped the brittle red wax with my thumb. I pulled out a single sheet of heavy stationery. The handwriting was not elegant. It was jagged, crooked, the violent, forceful strokes of a man who had to relearn how to hold a pen with reconstructed frostbitten stumps. The ink dug deep into the paper. It read, "For Clara, the lone wolf of this family. If the rats forget the meaning of honor, remind them." That was it. There were no sentimental goodbyes, no emotional apologies for his decades of silence, no tears. It was exactly what I expected from a man who crawled through the freezing snow at the Chosin Reservoir with a wounded comrade on his back. It was a combat directive. Walter Rose did not give me a fortune so I could live in luxury. He gave me a weapon. He handed me 51% of a corporate empire because he knew I was the exact kind of soldier who knew how to pull a trigger without shaking. I stared at the crooked, jagged letters. The deep humiliation of the lawyer's office earlier this morning vanished. The bone-deep exhaustion of the last 3 years evaporated from my muscles. I did not feel the joy of a lottery winner. I did not feel the manic excitement of a civilian finding a hidden treasure. I felt the absolute freezing calm of a sniper calculating the wind speed before taking a fatal shot. I gathered the bearer shares. I tapped the bottom edges against the stainless steel table, aligning them perfectly. A crisp, sharp sound echoing in the vault. I placed the documents back into the moisture barrier bag, folded the top down, and slipped it into my battered leather briefcase. I closed the briefcase. The heavy brass latches snapped shut with a loud final click. I stood straight. I adjusted the collar of my olive drab jacket. I turned to look at General Mercer. He had not moved a single inch. He was still watching me, his pale hawk eyes waiting for my assessment. The fluorescent lights buzzed relentlessly overhead. "General," I said, my voice cutting cleanly through the dead heavy air of the vault. "Major." I picked up the briefcase. The leather handle felt solid and heavy against my palm. "It is time we burn their front line to the ground." 6 in the morning, the Charleston Chronicle hit the newsstands right as the sun broke over the harbor. General Mercer did not just pull a string. He called in an artillery strike. The front page did not feature the latest political scandal or local sports. It featured a massive black and white photograph of Sergeant Walter Rose, frostbitten, bandaged, standing tall. The headline was simple, brutal, and impossible to ignore. "Declassified, the ghost of Chosin Reservoir. Walter Rose saved the commandant of the Marine Corps." By 6:15, the narrative had completely shifted. For decades, the Rose family name in Charleston was associated with country clubs, luxury yachts, and trust fund babies who never worked a hard day in their lives. The newspaper stripped all that fake gold away. It exposed the raw, bloody military honor that built the empire. And right there, standing in the shadow of a genuine war hero, Daniel looked exactly like what he was. A useless, soft-handed Nepo baby. My phone started vibrating at 6:30. I was sitting at my cheap kitchen table. The apartment was quiet except for the low hum of the refrigerator. I poured a mug of black coffee. The roast was cheap and slightly burnt. I liked it that way. It grounded me. The phone on the table lit up. Push notifications flooded the screen. News alerts, Wall Street Journal tags, missed calls. Ring, ring, ring. I ignored the first 5 calls. I let them ring out into the silence. You never answer the enemy when they are full of energy. You let them exhaust themselves. You let the panic sink into their bones. On the 6th call, I swiped the green icon and tapped the speaker button. "What the hell did you do?" Daniel's voice exploded through the tiny speaker. It was not his usual arrogant drawl. It was a raw, terrified scream. The sound of a man watching his glass house shatter. "The press is surrounding the main gates," he yelled, his breath coming in short, ragged gasps. "Did you leak this? You manipulated the old man on his deathbed just so you could get your 15 minutes of fame with that piece of junk watch, did you not?" I did not answer. I picked up a small metal spoon and slowly stirred my coffee. The metal clinked softly against the ceramic mug. "Are you listening to me?" Daniel roared. The panic was choking him. I could hear papers shuffling violently in the background. "You think this makes you look good? You think playing the martyr makes you better than us?" He was losing his mind. He was throwing wild punches in the dark, desperate to land a hit. You and that pathetic uniform. Daniel sneered, his voice dropping into a vicious, shaking hiss. You act so superior. You play the noble soldier, but you are just a hypocrite, Clara. You are nothing. I stopped stirring. I pulled the spoon out and set it on the table. I lifted the mug, took a slow sip of the bitter black coffee, and swallowed. The liquid burned a clean path down my throat. I leaned closer to the phone. I never thought I was better than you, Daniel, I said. My voice was completely flat. But I am the one who scrubbed Dad's bloody vomit off the bathroom floor at 3 a.m, while you were maxing out his credit card at the country club. Dead silence. The speaker crackled faintly. I could hear Daniel's ragged breathing abruptly stop. The ugly raw truth hit him like a physical blow. He had no defense against it. He could not buy his way out of that fact. Then a new sound came through the line, a sharp, hysterical sob. Daniel, stop it! Rebecca's voice cut in. She sounded frantic. She was crying, and it was not the fake rehearsed tears she used at the lawyer's office. This was real panic. We do not have time for this. Clara, please. Get off the phone, Rebecca. Daniel snapped, but his voice cracked. No, she shrieked. Tell her the truth. The stock is tanking, Clara. It dropped 9% at the opening bell because of the article. Investors are spooked. I frowned. A 9% drop on a local human interest piece did not make sense. Wall Street did not care about war heroes. They cared about profit margins. Unless the spotlight illuminated something Daniel was trying to hide. Why do you care about a 9% dip? I asked, my voice hardening. The company has enough liquid assets to weather a PR storm. We do not, Rebecca cried out. Daniel took out a loan, $58 million, against the future contracts. He bought the new distribution center, and he leveraged the pension fund to secure the margin. The air in my kitchen turned to ice. My hand tightened around the ceramic mug. My knuckles went white. $58 million. Margin calls. Daniel had gambled the company's future on a massive, reckless expansion to make himself look like a visionary CEO. But worse than that, he used the workers' 401k pension fund as collateral. If the stock price dropped below the threshold, the bank would execute a hostile margin call. Hundreds of blue-collar workers. The men who operated the heavy cranes in the freezing rain. The mechanics who kept the diesel trucks running. The forklift drivers who broke their backs loading cargo. They would lose their entire life savings. They would lose everything because a rich kid wanted to play big shot. This was no longer about a broken watch. It was no longer about a bitter family dispute over who scrubbed the floors. This was a combat zone. And civilians were trapped in the crossfire. I did not say another word. I reached out and tapped the red button, cutting the line dead. The apartment fell back into total silence. I did not finish my coffee. I stood up from the table. I grabbed my faded olive drab jacket from the back of the chair and slid my arms into the sleeves. I picked up the heavy leather briefcase containing the bearer's shares. I walked out the door and let the deadbolt slam shut behind me. 10 a.m. The corporate headquarters of Rose Coastal Logistics sat right on the waterfront in downtown Charleston. 3 stories of reinforced glass, dark steel, and sharp angles. It was a monument to money. I pushed through the heavy glass revolving doors. The air inside hit me like a solid wall of ice. The central air conditioning was cranked down to 65 degrees. The massive lobby smelled like lemon floor polish and the quiet arrogance of extreme wealth. I did not wear a designer dress. I did not carry a leather handbag. I wore my faded olive drab surplus jacket. I wore my boots. My heavy rubber soles struck the imported Italian marble floor. Clack, 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 a hard, steady, rhythmic thud. It was the only sound in the massive hollow room. The receptionist sitting behind the curved mahogany front desk froze. She was young, wearing an expensive blazer and far too much makeup. Her hands stopped hovering over her keyboard. Her eyes darted from my scuffed boots up to my jacket and finally locked onto my face. She swallowed hard. The quiet arrogance of the lobby was instantly suffocated by the violent reality I brought through the door. Miss Rose. She stammered, her hand reaching nervously for the desk phone. I did not stop walking. I did not look at her. I walked straight past the front desk, moving with the heavy forward momentum of a loaded freight train. I headed directly for the double-frosted glass doors at the end of the long corridor. The boardroom. I pushed the heavy doors open. The noise hit me immediately. Daniel was standing at the head of a massive custom-built glass conference table. He was slamming his flat palm against the surface. The expensive crystal water glasses rattled in their coasters. 10 older men in dark tailored suits sat around the table, the board of directors. They looked pale. They looked terrified. "It is a coordinated media hit." Daniel yelled, his face slick with a thin layer of nervous sweat. He pointed a shaking finger at a flat-screen television mounted on the far wall. The financial news network was playing on mute. A red ticker crawled rapidly across the bottom of the screen. Down 9%. That newspaper article spooked the retail investors. "We just need to issue a press release to calm the market down." Daniel stopped mid-sentence. He saw me standing in the doorway, his face twisted into an ugly, hateful sneer. The veins in his neck popped. "Get out! Security is on the way. You have no right to be in this building, Clara. This is a private corporate meeting." I walked into the room. I did not raise my voice. I did not argue. I reached into my heavy leather briefcase. I pulled out the olive drab moisture barrier bag containing the bearer's shares and the trust documents. I stepped up to the glass table and dropped the bag dead in the center. The impact sounded like a dropped anvil. A loud, heavy, violent thud echoed off the glass walls. Every man in the room jumped in his seat. "The stock is not dropping because of a newspaper article about our grandfather, Daniel," I said. My voice was low, flat, and carried to the back of the room with the force of a physical blow. "The stock is dropping because the institutional investors smell the rot. They smell the $58 million hidden debt you just tried to bury." The boardroom went dead silent. You could hear the faint mechanical hum of the air vents. 10 heads snapped away from me and locked onto Daniel. The oldest board member, a man with thin, white hair and a deeply lined face, slowly took off his reading glasses. He looked at Daniel like he was looking at a dead man. "What debt?" the old man asked. His throat was dry. He swallowed hard. "What is she talking about, Daniel?" Daniel panicked. The blood rushed to his face, turning his skin a dark, ugly crimson. He looked around the room, completely cornered. The arrogant, untouchable CEO facade cracked wide open, exposing the terrified little boy underneath. He lunged forward, planting both hands flat on the glass table. He glared at me, spitting his words through clenched teeth. "You do not know what you are talking about. You are a grunt. You spent your life playing soldier in the dirt. You know absolutely nothing about corporate finance. You know nothing about acceptable business risk." I stepped right up to the edge of the table. I placed my hands flat on the cold glass. I leaned my weight forward, closing the distance between us. I locked my eyes onto his. I did not blink. I stared at him with the cold, dead focus of a predator watching a trapped rat. "No," I said softly. The word cut through the room like a razor blade. "I know exactly what risk is. I know the actual physical consequences of risk. Because I had to use my blood and the blood of my team to pay for the stupid, arrogant decisions made by weak men sitting in air-conditioned rooms. Men exactly like you." Daniel stopped breathing. His jaw hung open. "You gambled the workers' pension fund," I said. I did not break eye contact. I pushed the reality of his crime right down his throat. "You leveraged the retirement money of men who break their backs on the docks so you could buy a warehouse and look like a king. You are not a king, Daniel. You are a thief." His psychological defense line completely shattered. The last remnants of his fake confidence vanished into the cold air. Daniel physically recoiled. He stumbled backward. The back of his knees hit the edge of his expensive leather ergonomic chair. He collapsed heavily into the seat. He looked pathetic. A grown man in a $3,000 suit, shrinking under the bright fluorescent lights. He let out a short, wet gasp. A sob caught in his throat. "You always thought you were better than us," Daniel choked out. His voice was small, high-pitched, and filled with decades of bitter poison. He rubbed a shaking hand across his mouth, his eyes darting to the floor. "You think you are so perfect. The old man thought you were perfect. Did you know that he hated looking at you? He hated you because he knew he could never be like you. There it was, the ugly naked truth, spilled right onto the boardroom table for everyone to see. Thomas Rose did not treat me like garbage because I was a failure. He treated me like garbage because he was a coward and my very existence proved it. He abused me, he made me scrub his vomit because he was terrified of the strength I carried. And he raised his son to do the exact same thing. I felt nothing. No anger, no sorrow, just a cold, empty clarity. I stood up straight. I pulled my hands off the glass table. I dismissed Daniel completely. I stopped looking at him. He was no longer a threat. He was just a mess crying in a chair. I turned my head and looked directly at the board of directors. The 10 men were frozen in their seats. They were holding their breath. They knew exactly who held the power in the room now. I did not fire Daniel on the spot. I did not hand him over to the police immediately. A swift execution is too easy for a coward. The waiting is what truly breaks them. The blade hovering over the neck is worse than the cut. I spoke with the absolute, unquestionable authority of a commanding officer. I am giving you exactly 48 hours, I said. My voice was hard iron. I want a complete, unredacted financial audit on this table by Friday morning. Every ledger, every hidden account, every single margin contract. I want to know exactly how much money we need to save the pension fund. I turned around and walked toward the double glass doors. Do not test me, I said, my voice echoing in the dead silence. Nobody leaves this building. I pushed the doors open and walked out into the cold hallway, leaving them locked inside their own terror. 48 hours later. I stood at the head of the massive glass conference table. The air inside the boardroom was stale and tense. 10 members of the board of directors sat frozen in their expensive leather chairs. Nobody spoke. Nobody looked at their phones. They kept their eyes fixed on me. Daniel sat at the far end of the room. He looked physically ill. The arrogant color had completely drained from his face. His expensive Italian suit hung loose on his shoulders. He looked like a man waiting for the executioner to drop the blade. I placed both of my hands flat against the cold glass. Daniel Rose, I said. My voice was steady, cutting through the dead silence of the room. You are officially removed as Chief Executive Officer of Rose Coastal Logistics. Daniel closed his eyes. His throat moved as he swallowed hard. He braced himself for the final blow. He expected me to call corporate security. He expected me to hand the forensic audit over to the federal authorities and watch him walk out of the glass lobby in steel handcuffs. I did not. Handing a coward over to the police is a quick escape. It gives them a chance to play the victim. I am freezing all executive bonus packages effective immediately. I continued. I pulled a stack of black corporate credit cards from my pocket and dropped them onto the glass table. These accounts are closed. The funds will be diverted back into the company accounts to completely stabilize the worker pension fund. The debt you created will be paid back with the money you plan to spend on luxury cars and country club memberships. The older board members let out a collective, quiet breath of relief. The blue-collar retirement fund was safe. The company would survive the week. As for you and Rebecca, I said, locking my eyes onto my brother, you are not fired. You owe this company $58 million in damages. You are going to work it off. You are officially reassigned to the Charleston shipping docks, inventory control and cargo management. Daniel's head snapped up. Genuine horror flashed in his eyes. You will clock in at 5 a.m, I told him, leaving absolutely no room for debate. You will wear steel-toe boots. You will stand on the hot asphalt for 12 hours a day. You will count shipping containers in the rain and the mud and in the 90-degree heat. You will learn exactly how the men you tried to rob earned their living. The ultimate punishment for a man who believed he was a king was forcing him to finally get his hands dirty. Late that night, the air inside my small apartment was quiet. The rattling space heater was turned off. A single dim yellow light bulb cast long, heavy shadows across the peeling walls. General Mercer sat across from me at the cheap laminate kitchen table. He did not wear his dress uniform. He wore a simple, dark civilian coat. He reached into his inner pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. It was heavily creased. The edges were worn down. The hospital staff found this in his bedside drawer after he passed, Mercer said. His gravel voice was low. He placed the paper on the table and pushed it toward me. It was sealed, addressed to you. I looked at the envelope. I did not want to touch it. I spent 3 years cleaning up after Thomas Rose. I spent 38 years carrying the weight of his disgust. I had nothing left to give him. But the discipline of a soldier demands that you face the target. I reached out and opened the envelope. The paper felt rough against my calloused fingertips. The handwriting was weak, shaky, and barely legible. It was the frantic scrawl of a dying man who finally realized he could not take his lies into the grave. I read the words in silence. I know you hate me, Clara. You have every right to. I watched you clean my floors, and I never said thank you. I watched you put on that uniform, and I mocked you. But I did not hate you because you were small. I did not hate you because you were a failure. I hated you because every time I looked at you, I saw my father. You have his spine. You have his iron. I hated you because you constantly reminded me of the man I never had the courage to become. The letters blurred. The greatest enemy of my life was not a monster. He was just a terrified, pathetic coward. He spent his entire life projecting his own deep shame onto the only person strong enough to carry it. The heavy, suffocating chains that I dragged around for almost 4 decades were forged from his jealousy. I was never the broken one. I set the letter down on the laminate table. I bowed my head forward. I pressed my face into my hands. My palms were rough-scarred and permanently calloused from years of manual labor and combat training. In the dim yellow light of the quiet kitchen, the absolute rigid discipline of the major finally fractured. I closed my eyes. A single heavy drop of water slipped past my eyelashes. It ran down my cheek and soaked into the rough skin of my palm. I did not cry out. I did not sob. It was just one tear. But it washed away 38 years of invisible dirt. Real time. The present day. The sky over the Charleston harbor was a clear, brilliant blue. The air smelled strongly of heavy diesel exhaust and sharp sea salt. The massive steel cranes moved slowly across the horizon, lifting shipping containers off the massive cargo vessels. A military memorial service had just concluded near the edge of the docks. A folded American flag rested on a wooden pedestal. General Raymond Mercer was gone. I stood near the railing watching the dark water hit the concrete pilings. I wore my faded olive drab jacket. On my left wrist, secured by a brand new canvas strap, was the Korean War watch. The cracked glass had been replaced. The rusted internal gears had been cleaned, oiled, and restored. Tick, tick, tick. The second hand moved forward with a strong, sharp mechanical rhythm. A massive yellow forklift drove past me on the asphalt. The driver, a heavy-set man in a stained reflective vest, slowed the machine down. He caught my eye. He did not say a word, but he gave me a slow, deep nod of absolute respect. He knew his pension was safe. He knew who was standing watch. Down below near the loading bays, a man was struggling to drag a heavy wooden pallet across the concrete. His designer clothes were gone. He wore a cheap, sweat-soaked canvas shirt. His face was burned red by the harsh coastal sun. His hands were covered in dark grease and splinters. Daniel wiped the dirty sweat from his forehead with the back of his arm. He gritted his teeth, grabbed the heavy wooden edge, and pulled again. He did not complain. He did not scream at anyone. He had finally learned how to keep his mouth shut. I looked down at the heavy steel watch on my wrist. I listened to the steady, relentless ticking of the gears. General Mercer's voice echoed clearly in my mind, carrying over the loud noise of the working harbor. Some things only work again after time and pressure. If you enjoyed this story, please like this video, leave a comment below, and subscribe to our channel. Thank you so much for listening, and we will see you next time.